What's good, everybody? It's your brother YK The Truth. And people always come to my channel and ask me, man, show the boats. Where the boats at? If the slave trade is real, where are all the boats? And I always think to myself, yo, is something wrong with this person? See, they actually think that those boats were only made for slaves or slave trading. This is where you fail at. The slave trade was not only about slaves, okay? It was more than just for slaves. The ships were more than just for slaves, okay? I'm going to give you sources, and I'm going to show you how you can search these names on slave voyages. Like, this is really good right here. You can actually go to slave voyages, and it got a list of the captain's names, okay? So this is going to debunk that the slave trade never happened and all of that crazy stuff that a lot of these wannabe Indians claim, right? And you can type in their names and see who they were and see what type of business they ran, okay? It wasn't only about slaves. It wasn't only about slaves. You know, slaves make tobacco. You know, they harvest tobacco. So you need to ship tobacco, right? So just because slavery was abolished or the slave trade stopped, it doesn't mean that people still wasn't using tobacco or that people didn't need food or trade. So what you think? Because slavery was over, they said, well, we're going to use these ships, right? And we're going to put them in a museum for slavery. No, these people were in it to make money. Business. So whenever you say things like, man, where are all the boats? You act like these people is going to put up, they in the business of making money. They're going to use those boats until they can't use those boats anymore. But what we can do is, let me show you what I'm about to do. I'm going to click on one of these dudes' name, and then I'm going to see what type of business they were in. And did they only transport slaves? So we can put this to bed. I mean, just go to the slave trade. Go to the slave voyages. Everybody want to take shots at the slave voyages when they have names that you can go and back up with historical documents. And then, since you guys are so big into genealogy, right? You can actually trace the genealogy of some of these slave traders and see that they actually existed. See, this is why they got to switch up and say, well, not some of us are not African. You get it? Yeah, you get it now. They can't say, well, nobody. Before it was, man, the slave trade was impossible because they would have died on the sea. Remember that? But now we can actually trace these slave traders to historical documents and do genealogy. Now it's not all people come from Africa. But how do you know if you don't believe in genealogy? I mean, excuse me, if you don't believe in DNA, how do you know if you're not the one that's from Africa? And I call that a checkmate, because you always hear that's the first thing they say. Well, not everybody is from, not every black person is from Africa. But how do you know? So basically, you're just pretending and hoping and praying that it's you that's the Indian. It don't work like that. But let's get to the source. All right, so here it goes. So here's a slave voyage ID and a slave vessel name. All right, it's called the Postilion, and the owner is Issac Hop House. Okay, Great Britain. Now we're going to see if this Issac Hop House actually existed, and if he was only in the business of transporting slaves. Okay? And if he was in other businesses like, transporting tobacco, then we know that even though the slave trade was abolished, these people were still using their vessels to transport other commodities. All right? So please stop asking me, man, where are the ships? Because you really look like a fool when you say that. Just go to Slave Voyages. There's thousands of ships on here with vessel names. So let's see if this Issac Hop House ever existed. Okay, so let's see if this Issac Hop House existed, and let's see if he only transported African slaves. All right? If he only transported African slaves, then you can say, where are those ships? Okay? So, here we go. Now, this is the Virginia letter of Issac Hop House, merchant of Bristol. Now, let's read it. Okay? It said, the commerce carried on between Bristol and Virginia at this time falls into two patterns, the triangular and the direct. In the first, Bristol ships took trade goods to the west coast of Africa for the purchase of Negro slaves, which they transported to Virginia. In a direct trade, Bristol ships took manufactured goods from Great Britain and other European countries to Virginia. In both cases, the ships returned to Bristol carrying tobacco, iron, and timber and the produce of Virginia. So let's stop right there. We clearly see that they used those ships for more than just the slave trade. So don't ever say or ask, where are those ships? Those ships were used for other things. Okay? And then after that, they probably rotted. So, but we have the evidence that those ships existed because we got the slave voyages who has names. Then we can find historical documents. You can even do genealogy to find those real people. All right. So YK put that to bed. That goes night. Don't ask me, where are those ships? Show the boats. Show the boats. I got one dude who keep dropping the comment, show the boats on my channel. That's the only thing he can say. That's the only thing you know how to say. Show the boats. Well, I'm going to show you the boats without showing you the boats. Now that's gangster. Because you don't have to see something to believe that it existed. Right? Let me repeat that. You don't have to see something to believe that it existed. Right? Let me break it down to you. We have people who've passed away, may it be a mother or a father, right? We don't see them, but we know they existed based on us being here. Do you follow me? There's people who existed. This is where you get historical, writings and letters like this one. Do you follow me? Now, here it goes. It says, from the later 17th century, Bristol ships had engaged in clandestinely in the slave trade. their number increasing when the trade was thrown open in 1698. See, they jumped on board. At first, they were just doing tobacco, iron, timber, and all that stuff. Then they said, okay, well, here's something else, because you got to understand, it all makes sense because our ancestors was literally human cargo. We was chattel. It was like they were actually transporting an animal. 3/5. So it would make sense that they were transporting other goods. Okay. So we got that out the way. In the following 10 years, 5 out of 39 slave ships between Virginia came from Bristol and the remainder from London between 1710 and 1718. The proportion increased with 23 out of 66 ships coming from Bristol. Okay? Now, let's go down. It says in 1723, 3 ships carried slaves to Virginia: the Swift of London and the Shirley and the Greyhound of Bristol. The latter was owned by Issac Hop House. She was a ship of 100 tons with the armament of 6 guns and a crew of 20. Okay? Built in Bristol. In 1706, the Greyhound had been for some time regularly engaged in the slave trade, making 1 complete voyage each year. In 1718, she had carried 182 Negroes to Virginia. In 1719, 107. In 1721, 222. And in 1722, 166 slaves. And so she continued in the slave trade until 1736. She was replaced by a new and larger ship of the same name. Okay? So, we can put that to bed. Don't ask me where the ship's at. We can put it to bed. And not only that, I want y'all to research the Dobriens Act, where he created the act because of the conditions that were on a slave ship, where people were dying and crewmen were dying. So he created the Dobriens Act. These are laws where you can actually go and see that. You know what amazes me? What a lot of these so-called Indians is that they love to cherry pick these old ass outdated books that say copper colored people. They love history when it fits their belief. They love history. But when you have laws that were put in place, they ignore it. Right? When you have evidence, they ignore it. So William Dobriens there was an act created. Okay? Now let's speak on it. It said right here, he was alluding to the so-called Middle Passage, during which Negro slaves were transported from the coast of Africa to various West Indian ports. Invariably, an inordinate number of slaves were crammed aboard the ships, allowing each very little room in which to sleep. The cramped quarters did not conduce to healthy living conditions. During the day, moreover, the slaves were chained hand and foot to each other and to the deck, and were given very little water and that of poor quality to drink. Dobriens therefore urged his colleagues to apply a remedy for these evils soon. If actions were not taken before the end of the present session, he warned, as many as 10,000 lives, slaves, and British seamen could be lost. Okay? So we have historical evidence that the slave trade took place. Stop asking where the damn boats at. They didn't only use those boats for the slave trade. Not only that, not all of those boats were made in America. So, and we got the Clotilda. We got shipwrecks. We got evidence that this actually took place. So if you say that not all black people come from Africa, you would have to prove that you're not one of those black people that come from Africa. And if you don't believe in DNA tests, do you believe that DNA test is a hoax? Then you don't know if you're a native or not. And with that being said, it's your brother YK the Truth, and I'm out. Peace.